/WWII WSCTTR. This will become the most reliable source of information, accurate and trustworthy. A must-read for all of Joe's legion of fans. Joe's astonishing arrivability on most long-term fans will know Joe's great friend, the famous promoter, Mickey Martin. Joe always enjoyed their frequent chats together on Mickey's regular visits. He rang me recently, so I'll let him take up the story. Hiya Terry, I just had to call you. Your name would so often come up in conversations with Joe, and his deep respect and affection for you was always clear. But nothing prepared me for what he shared in our final talk, just days before he passed. As usual, he mentioned you, but this time with tears in his eyes. He said, Mickey, the only person I missed more than Terry was my mum. I always knew you two were close, but hearing that really moved me. Then he said something that stayed with me ever since. I could and should have stopped Terry from leaving that night after the South End show. I made a terrible mistake. I thought he'd come back, but he never did. Terry always had the answers. However big the problem, he found a way. No one knew how, he just did. And then he added something else. He said you two had worked together behind the scenes, secretly, to fend off the Muppets. That's the word he used, the Muppets. He specifically mentioned Keith Holliday and James Moran, who, he said, he came to truly despise. Joe's words were raw, honest, and full of regret. I thought you should know, Terry. It meant a lot to him, and it meant a lot to me to hear it. Another Dyer's Seal or Ether last studio album that was produced by Terry and Joe in 2010. While Moran was on holiday alone in Thailand, he'd left the distraught Joe at home. Joe entitled it You and Me, obviously referring to the fans. Some years later, Joe revealed that it was personally dedicated to himself and Terry, who conceived it while James Moran had run away to Thailand. Asterisk. Message from the author, a personal message to all my friends and acquaintances. Sincere thanks and appreciation for all your support and encouragement throughout this extremely involved and difficult journey producing this manuscript. As it presently exists, it is readable, but it is also unfinished. Considerably more work is necessary after it has been professionally edited. This will take several more months before it is ready to be submitted to the publisher who originally requested it. Finally, at nearly 80 years of age and now in understandably delicate health, the future is uncertain on a day-to-day basis. If possible, please evaluate the work. Your input and personal opinion would be appreciated if time is available. Thank you. You ever so tell another message from the authority. Thought my shovel and I had retired, until the local council insisted that my friend cap his well or empty it as a feature. Everybody shied away from this unpleasant task, so it was down to me to help a friend. Eventually, when I found the rusty pump gear signifying that I was at the bottom, it was at a depth of 30 feet, all in a liafit iamehalo there. Thank you for your interest. How did this autobiography materialize? I would not want anyone to believe that it is a self-indulgent composition, an ego trip. Sections within this book cover my time at the sharp end of show business, where for over 25 years I directed and produced the works of two great artists. One, in the opinion of many of his fellow professionals, was the most entertaining that our wonderful country has ever produced. The other, a lady closely behind in vocal ability. Both put everything into every performance. The results were easy for me to capture, both vocally and visually, there for all to see. The recording equipment simply loved them. Several years ago, I decided to place their lives on paper by way of their biographies. However, please don't believe that this work is just another show business revelation. It's not. Had it been published as 2 biographies, that obviously would have been the case. I presented the biogs to a close friend, the writer, broadcaster, and journalist, Alan Hardwick, and Julie, his wonderful partner. After our association of 40 years, they knew my personality and life inside out. After a couple of weeks, they invited me to Lincolnshire to offer their opinions. I was to be shocked by them. They both proffered the same conclusion, maintaining that although my 2 presentations were interesting, there lay within my gift, in their opinion, a far more interesting story, my own. This they encouraged me to pick up the pen once again and produce, literally, because I don't type. What you read now is my best effort to place it on paper. There is a phrase that is thrown about and much overused that's unreliable generally in the advertising and promotion field. However, I can genuinely apply it with the utmost certainty. A story unlike any other. Throughout our world, there are 7 billion inhabitants. My life's journey has never been emulated in any other country worldwide by any other inhabitant. It really has been unlike any other, a one-off. Even if relaxed comparisons are applied elsewhere, it cannot be equaled. For example, late in Her Majesty's reign, Elizabeth, the Queen of England, dispatched her emissaries to approach me on her behalf for assistance, believe it or not. This honor and challenge I accepted with enthusiasm and gratitude. Then for the final 4 years of Her Majesty's life, my efforts were continually requested and successful on a subject that will surprise you. Successful from the outset, and continued to be so every year with new stock until her passing. Then, when King Charles ascended to the throne, our association continued. That one simple fact would be difficult for any other to replicate, even if applied to their country's head of state. However, there are scores of other conditions to fulfill, probably far more difficult. Hopefully, they will be of interest when you encounter them. A few years ago, I was introduced to Rudyard Kipling's world-famous poem, If, by Sir Michael Caine. It's Michael's personal favorite. It is now also mine. Some of its content reflects accurately upon my own life, such as, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those 2 impostors just the same, if you can make one heap of all your winnings and risk it all on one pitch and toss and lose it all and start again at your beginnings. If you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they are gone. If you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds of distance run, yours is the earth and everything in it, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son. If, for example, others can master 3 occupations that are often believed to be the world's most dangerous, if they can complete their army's most difficult entry course at all, let alone at 17 years old, be invited to professional trials alongside Ray Clements, who attained 85 England caps with a First Division club Premiership clubs now. That brought about a concerned conversation with his father on the club's training ground. He shouldn't have worried. His son's all-round game was far better than mine, although I must say that few were equal to my shot-stopping ability, if any, without experience or equipment or indeed transport. Travelled for 20 miles on public transport, then relieved. Accompany OCS, Office Cleaning Services, Britain's largest cleaning contractor of Sheffield's most lucrative contract, then go on to do the same in both Doncaster and Barnsley. If they can place credentials on the table that prove that they are the best participants in 2 aspects of a world-famous recreational sport, with many millions of participants, if they can direct and produce a #1 charting gold record concert from their country's equivalent of our famous and recognizable worldwide venue, the Royal Albert Hall, then they will be on their way to equality. Although all that have presently observed my words think it impossible for any other to have done so. Let's travel further together. Well, it's been quite an interesting journey, and before I arrive at life's terminus, I would like to acquaint you with it. I was conceived immediately after the hostilities of the 39-45 war ceased. Presumably, my parents, Eric and Edna Lodge, thought it was now safe to do so, although rationing was still in place, and the country was about to give birth to the NHS and the nationalization of our major industries. These groundbreaking changes to the country's direction were being put in place by the newly elected Labour government. Perhaps a surprise victory over the Conservatives immediately after the war. My birthplace was St Helens Hospital in the South Yorkshire mining town of Barnsley. The imposing, grimy old building was a throwback to the dark ages of the late 1800s and the terrible poverty that was present. In fact, the building was a former workhouse, prison-like accommodation for poor and destitute individuals who were paying the penalty for falling on hard times in an even harder environment. Evidently, according to my mother, I was a hard birth for her to bear. A breach, I was often informed and reminded of it during my early life, usually with the addition that I'd been a bloody awkward sod ever since. Mother and I often clashed throughout her lifetime. Not that I can remember, but initially we lived with father's parents in an end terrace of 4 overlooking the local colliery, North Gorber, which was destined to be my first place of full employment 15 years into the future. The house was in the village of Staincross, which has quite a history attached to it. It's been one of Old England's oldest places of residence. It was in existence long before the Vikings arrived and settled there. Around 800 AD, their tenure would last until 1100 AD. The rivers Ira and Calder were navigated after the Vikings arrived in their longboats via the North Sea and the River Humber, from their homelands of Denmark, Sweden and Norway. They arrived en masse in the West Yorkshire town of Pontefract, so named by them because its name relates to it having a broken bridge. The terrain in this part of West Yorkshire is extremely low-lying, floodplains in fact. With that in mind, the Vikings wanted higher ground to set up an encampment. 12 miles or so to the west was a promontory Staincross, which is 400 feet above sea level and afforded excellent all-round views and protection. Another major asset was that water was readily available, even at the summit of the village. Excavate 3 feet below ground and you find water all year round. So came into existence the Anglo-Saxon Parliament, the wapentake of Staincross. For the next 300 years, it became the place of government and administration that presided over an area that now includes Huddersfield, right out to the Lancashire border, Barnsley, and parts of Sheffield, Rotherham, and Doncaster. The emergence of Mapplewell in the late 1600s. The village of Mapplewell was formed, and it latched itself onto Staincross, which had already existed for over 1,000 years. Mapplewell was a contrivance. The thriving industry of that time revolved around nail-making. There were over 100 nail shops located in the 2 villages. Nails from there were used in the construction of ships, HMS Victory being one of many to benefit. The only other form of employment at that time was the dangerous task of extracting outcropping coal from the bell pits that were situated throughout the 2 villages. Without the extracted coal, the small nail furnaces could not function. Bell pits, as the name suggests, were bell-shaped surface mines. They had a small aperture on the surface, which allowed the miners to enter and the coal to be recovered. This primitive method of extraction often accounted for men's lives, as the surface seams of coal were located sometimes only several feet from the surface. When it was extracted using a downward and lateral extraction method, thus creating a bell shape, no roof supports were ever fixed, relying only on gravity and providence to avoid being buried alive. All too frequently, Lady Luck deserted them. The first commercial mining operations began in the mid-1850s. Thankfully, the bell pit death traps were now obsolete. The local colliery shaft was sunk in the 1850s. North Gorber employed 1,400 underground and surface workers. It had a shaft depth to the pit bottom of 400 meters. It was producing 15,000 tons of prime coal per week. It was all recovered, hand-filled, in other words, without mechanization, using a pick or a peggier pick with a hammerhead and a large coaling shovel. The stint's distance on face for each face worker varied between 14 meters to 20 meters, depending on the coal seam's thickness, which equates to approximately 20 tons per man shift. Staincross and Mapplewell were divided by New Road. Every house on its downside was in Mapplewell. Consequently, the houses on New Road's upside were deemed to be in Staincross. 7 or 8 months after my arrival, Father purchased 252 and 254, a pair of extremely run-down cottages with 1 acre of land on the hillside, for a princely sum of £1,000. Subject to a 25-year mortgage of slightly under £4 per month. How times have changed. Less than £1 per week to purchase your own home. I can vouch for those figures because from 5 years of age, it was my responsibility to attend the Halifax Building Society for miles away in Barnsley to pay it. The year after I was born, my sister Jo arrived. Finally, our brother Martin was the third and last sibling. That was to be the total extent of the Lodge family. Father was a face worker at WWII Colliery, a couple of miles north of North Gorber and twice its size. After the acquisition of his acre of land, Father was now a landowner, Bringing home the Bacon father's newfound status as a landowner brought about a new direction to utilize the land as a smallholding. He decided to build a pigsty and obtain a sow in Pig. What followed would become my earliest recollection that I can relate in detail. I'd been nearly 3 at this time. The brick pigsty was quite impressive, some achievement for someone who had previously never laid a single brick. Its dimensions were roughly 5 meters by 3 meters, 6 feet in height, with a concrete floor and corrugated tin roof. Entrance was a pair of stable doors. Wooden rails and cross members were set into the concrete, one from all the external walls. Curiously, I inquired what they were for. Father explained, to protect the piglets from being accidentally rolled upon and crushed. Previously, I've mentioned the dilapidated property that was purchased in 1947. It consisted of 2 adjoined cottages, one up and one down, each approximately 5 meters by 5 meters. All 5 of us resided in 252. 254 remained dormant and empty for the next 12 years. Within the main structure, there were no facilities at all, with the exception of a gas supply and an open coal fire. The slate roof was in serious need of attention. For many years, it let in water in 9 or 10 different places. Cold water for all purposes was located in a lean-to extension at the rear of 252 New Road. Its rough concrete floor was permanently soaked by water making its way under the lean-to back door. No artificial light was available. A window that should have afforded natural light was obscured by overgrown bushes and vegetation. It was a truly depressing experience attempting to keep clean. To make matters worse, it was rat-infested. The luxury of hot water on tap and electricity did not occur until I was 10 years old. All the village was electrified for years prior. But father, along with a handful of diehards, refused the opportunity. The open fire and a small oven were mother's only method of cooking and baking for the family. Outdated and near redundant gas, for lighting purposes, was the only means to illuminate our miserable home and lives. The gas equivalent of the electric light bulb was the gas mantle, a bulbous gauze fitting without which coal gas could not illuminate. The archenemy at dusk was the daddy longlegs, or crane fly, and of course, moths. Their arrival, attracted by the gaslight, was often the only form of entertainment we kids had. Mantles were extremely expensive. The insects appeared to be agents of the manufacturers. In the fading evening light, the winged predators made an immediate beeline for the light source. Mantles were extremely delicate and could be easily damaged. Frequently, we sat about laughing, witnessing mother dashing about the room in an attempt to prevent the mantle's destruction from the intruders. Mother's housekeeping money only lasted Friday to Wednesday. Father got off light. She was too proud to request more housekeeping money because frequently they weren't speaking. So, we often sat in the dark, being without a shilling 5p4. The gas meter only illuminated by the light of the open coal fire. The slate roof was in serious need of attention. For many years, it let in water in 9 or 10 different places. Cold water for all purposes was located in a lintel extension at the rear of 252 New Road. Its rough concrete floor was permanently soaked by water making its way under the lean-to back door. No artificial light was available. A window that should have afforded natural light was obscured by overgrown bushes and vegetation. It was a truly depressing experience attempting to keep clean. To make matters worse, it was rat-infested. The luxury of hot water on tap and electricity did not occur until I was 10 years old. All the village was electrified for years prior. But father, along with a handful of diehards, refused the opportunity. The open fire and a small oven were mother's only method of cooking and baking for the family. Autobiography and near redundant gas for lighting purposes was the only means to illuminate our miserable home and lives. The gas equivalent of the electric light bulb was the gas mantle, a bulbous gauze fitting without which coal gas could not illuminate. The archenemy at dusk was the daddy longlegs, or crane fly, and of course, moths. Their arrival, attracted by the gaslight, was often the only form of entertainment we kids had. Mantles were extremely expensive. The insects appeared to be agents of the manufacturers. In the fading evening light, the winged predators made an immediate beeline for the light source. Mantles were extremely delicate and could be easily damaged. Frequently, we sat about laughing, witnessing mother dashing about the room in an attempt to prevent the mantle's destruction from the intruders. Mother's housekeeping only lasted Friday to Wednesday. Father got off light. She was too proud to request more housekeeping money because frequently they weren't speaking. So, we often sat in the dark, being without a shilling 5p for the gas meter, only illuminated by the light of the open coal fire. On these occasions, as we sat quietly, a myriad of mice came out to play. We could hear them scampering around, often dozens of them. They were not really a problem, except for the smell. The rats in the Leonta washing facility were another matter. After dark, we never opened the back door, even if we were thirsty, to obtain a drink. Nerve-wracking JOURNAY, my first recollection as a child, in any accurate detail, was just before my 3rd birthday. Previously, I've mentioned the pigsty father had constructed. Now his intention was to fill it. He purchased a sow in Pig. It was located 3 miles away on an allotment. So, confident or foolhardy father borrowed a pony and trap rather more foolish than brave. 2 miles of that journey was on the main A61. This road, before the M1 opened in 1960, was the main trunk road between Leeds via Sheffield to Derby and beyond. The only thing father knew about horses is that they had 4 legs, 1 in each corner. He'd never handled a pony and trap before. This enterprise was bordering upon suicide. Undaunted, with me by his side, our journey began. I didn't see much of the outward journey. Most of the time, my hands were covering my eyes. More vehicle horns were blown that day than were blown at the walls of Jericho. Upon arrival, the fun began. I remained on the passenger seat and watched the pantomime unfold. Father and the seller lowered the trap's tailgate. Next, the sow emerged from her present home. She was enormous, worse still, uncontrollable. From the word go, it was obvious that she had no intention of leaving her present residence. For the best part of 45 minutes, the men attempted to lure her into the pony and trap. Once nearly succeeding, by now even the pony was becoming restless. Then, as if by magic, the sow just sauntered up the ramp into the trap, unaided. Stealthily, father secured the tailgate, paid for the pig, and clambered aboard. Job done, afraid not. The pig had other ideas. She clambered over the low tailgate to freedom once more. This should have been avoided had the men placed the thick Hessian net over the pig in the trap, but they forgot. Could have been worse. It could have found its freedom on the main road on the way home. The sow must have thought it a game the 3 of them were playing. She once again clambered aboard the trap, with the tailgate secured, and this time the restraining net was put in place. The return tailgate secured. A problem was developing. The February light was beginning to fade. We were still 3 miles from home without any lights. I don't know why, but I remember thinking the poor pony must be starving. Perhaps it was because my tummy was rumbling. What an adventure it had been, father being something of a chancer, a risk-taker. Don't think, what if? Just do it. The excitement of that day, with its adrenaline rush, was to influence me throughout all my life. A few more motoring near misses occurred whilst feeling our way home. However, we all arrived back safely at the ranch. With the aid of feed in the bucket, the sow was soon ensconced in her new home, leaving us all to wait out the gestation period patiently. By the size of her, it must be a large litter. Eventually, it was apparent that she was late, then very late, then nothing. She wasn't in Pig. Father had been sold a pig in a poke. That was to register, I recall, as my first recollection of disappointment in my life. They say you always remember your first. That's how it goes, isn't it? The sow became a pet and remained with us for many years. There was a stump of an old hazel pear tree protruding out of the ground. She used to come and rub her sides down upon it. I'd stand on the stump and climb aboard. I became quite adept at staying on board, but I'm sure only if she allowed it. We had a radio. It ran on accumulator batteries recharged by Mr. Flowers. Adrian Flowers, a schoolmate's father. It was one of my numerous tasks to take it for an exchange once a week. Chopping sticks for the fire, getting in the cold 2 buckets from around the back of the house before dark. From 4 years old, every Saturday I was sent for miles to town by my father, sometimes to the army and navy stores, to buy pit shirts and trousers. When I inquired what size I should ask for, father's response was to find someone in the shop that resembled his height and weight, and to use that as a guider, method that was more than likely to lead to ill-fitting clothes. Not to worry, it was never going to be a fashion show. A weekly task on a Saturday was to attend Midgley's pet shop on Peel Street, in town, to purchase special seeds and minerals for his pigeons. My last task before returning home, undoubtedly. The worst job was about twice a month I'd go to the fish market to buy mussels. I was never given a bag to accommodate and transport them. They were wrapped in newspaper. Obviously, after being boiled, they were wet, and before I got home on the bus, they were bursting through the wet wrapping. I was just treated as an errand boy, unpaid of course. Never did I receive spending money. Little wonder I was running away from home regularly from 7 onwards. Cold porcelain, let's rewind to the early days. I'm sure you all realize that we did not have a bathroom. The toilet was at the back of the house, in a yard alongside several derelict buildings, including an old 2-story barn. To say it was eerie was an understatement. It was 25 meters away from the house. In the winter, after 4:30 p.m., it became pitch black. If you needed to attend, it was very frightening for a nipper. You imagine anyone could be lurking there. Mother was a hard, unfeeling woman. She would never escort either my sister or myself, even part way. She would just stand by the fire with her skirt hitched up, warming her arse and reddening the back of her legs. Another recollection about the toilet. It never had a seat. You had to sit on the cold porcelain. In the winter, it was so cold you stuck to its surface. It was like that for 12 years, until they got an indoor bathroom with running water. My sister, a year younger, would beg me to take her to the toilet, which I did, although I was as frightened as she was. The trees and bushes moving in the wind didn't help. It was just sinister and unnerving. We had a torch, but we weren't allowed to use it. After bedtime, with 4 of us in the small bedroom, father worked regular nights. We all had to use a bucket. Guess whose duty it was to empty the bucket every morning before I made the fire? Mother would remain in bed until I got the fire going. We never had an egg or buttered bread for breakfast. My first eggs were a luxury when I was 15. Thank heaven for the pit canteen. There were only 2 things on our breakfast menu: a plate of porridge or milk pubstats, a slice of bread torn up and boiled milk poured over it, with a spoonful of sugar added. This we received from my earliest memory at 3 until me leaving school at 15. Thank God for school milk and dinners. My sister and I were used as pawns, bargaining chips. At 3, I recall that mother left our father and returned to my nan's, along with Joe. I refused to go with them, remaining with father. I suppose that was my first instance of exercising my independent thinking. That would occur many more times during my childhood. The weak mother was away. I lived on scallops, potato slices fried, prepared by father. Each evening at 9:30 p.m., he would lock the door and leave me alone in the pitch-black house and attend work on the nice bad time that frightening.
Nan intervenes, ... asterisk, asterisk. My mother's mother, Sarah Roebuck, was probably the nicest lady I ever came across in life. Mother must have taken after her father, whom I never knew. Evidently, he held his colliery manager's papers. After several days, Nan sent her daughter, my mother, back to Staincross to renew and respect her marital status. Already in my young life, which was a constant battle with my mother. I was to be, however, a good deal older before I would make the same stand against my father. It wasn't simply a matter of me having a rebellious personality. I was fighting back against a person whom I didn't respect and never would. For years after her return, she would throw it in my face that she only returned because I wouldn't leave. I was the reason she was trapped, which was nonsense. Nan had told her she had to return. Father was always indifferent towards me. I often thought that perhaps he resented the fact that I stayed because it brought Mother back home. But that was inevitable. Deep thinking for a 4-year-old, I used to entertain myself around the back of our house, amongst the old garages, sheds, and the barn. There were no other children of my own age in the immediate vicinity. There was also a gang culture abiding, which I'll discuss more fully shortly. I suppose those circumstances in my early life molded my personality as the independent loner I would become. Often, whilst entertaining myself, Father would walk past me, carrying his large watering can up to the top of the garden. I'd stand and just look at him, hoping for some recognition, a word or gesture. All I ever got was a look. In later life, I considered whether or not I was the cause of their marriage. Was it, as they say, forced? The indifference bordering on? Resentment certainly was real. No hugs or kisses in our house. In all my 17 years trapped within its walls, I never saw one single instance of it. At 4, I was enrolled at Mapplewell Infant School, which was located at North Gobber Pit Gates. A stark reminder to the boys who didn't excel in the school and escape. That's where they were likely to end up. I loved school. It was escapism away from the awful atmosphere of our home life. That, plus the fact that we received school milk in little 1/3 pint bottles. And in fact, we received a nourishing dinner 5 days a week. During the long winter months, the little bottles delivered during the night often froze solid. The effective way of thawing them out was to place them on the warm radiators. In addition, the silver foil tops were often penetrated by blue tits, so as to steal the cream. Also, there was the added bonus that I was for the very first time among kids of my own age, both boys and girls. I was sporty, loving games, and as a contradiction to my loner personality, I was a good team player. At home, there were 2 pairs of full-size boxing gloves, a legacy from Uncle Hubert, Mother's brother. During the long winter months, I would don the oversized gloves and shadow box to the gaslight, punching the wall, constructing combination moves. I became extremely proficient in the art of self-defense. I love football also. My aim was to be a goalkeeper, so after 30 minutes, gloved up, I would throw a tennis ball against the wall and catch it, always attempting to make the returning ball return on an angle so I could dive to secure it. Forgot to mention that I'd removed the boxing gloves by this time. The room we all lived in was 18 feet by 15, with little furniture to impede my games. The stone flag floor was hard on the knees, but it was all worth it. A couple of years later, we got floor covering, cocoa matting, which was probably more abrasive than the flagged floor. Upon moving up into the junior section of the school, I was chosen as the school goalkeeper, an early lesson in the reward for practice and dedication. On several occasions, I was required to put my defensive skills to good effect, subduing 2 notorious bullies. I haven't mentioned it before, but Father was a pigeon fancier. He raced long-distance homing pigeons, hence the watering can to the loft on top of the hill. The gold medal winner of further restriction upon my free time was about to occur. I'd just begun to make a couple of new pals. We were meeting up for a couple of hours after school. Father's new scheme curtailed all that. Home from school about 4 p.m. By 4:30 p.m., I was making my way down New Road, some 600 meters to the bus stop. Struggling with a pigeon basket with 3 occupants, our destination was Leeds, some 20 miles away. Journey time, 90 minutes. Remember, I wasn't even 6 years old at that time. On arrival, I'd have to quickly make for the nearest car park and release the 3 pigeons, then dash back to catch the same bus back to Staincross. If it had arrived in Leeds on time, I would make it. However, if it was late arriving, it would turn around and leave immediately. Instead of arriving home at 8, it would be 9 o'clock p.m. Not much fun stuck in Leeds bus station at 5 years old with a pigeon basket, you can be assured of that. Growing up was really on fast forward. This went on for a couple of months during that early summer. I was training the birds towards top fitness and form for the Blue Ribbon Race of the Year from Lerwick and the Shetland Islands, some 446 miles, nearly half over water, where only the fittest of pigeons would ever return if the flight time on the wing got into the 10 hours plus region. Towards the end of July, the championship race was scheduled. In total, 6,000 plus pigeons were liberated at 7 a.m. on that fateful Saturday morning into a moderate southwesterly wind. A headwind. It was going to be a hard race. I got the bug by now. Father had chosen 2 of my 3 train charges, confidently pulling them through to the 5 pounds. It was the first time to Lerwick for our birds. They were bred for that sort of distance, but they were competing against hundreds of proven birds that had previously returned at least once. We all sat together at the side of the little 10 loft, painted in red and white stripes that housed our 2 birds that carried all our hopes and all Father's money. We had assembled between 2 p.m. and 3 p.m., 7 or 8 of us. It was past 6 p.m. There was total silence. The men all realized it had become a test of stamina. In another hour, not too many of the participants would still be airborne. There was a sudden swish of wings. Banking onto the loft's landing board was the mealycock. As he hit the board, his legs that had been raised for 11 hours 20 minutes collapsed beneath him. Father gently picked him up off the board, removed the rubber race ring carefully, and timed the proof of his arrival into a sealed timing clock. This happened inside the loft, and Father didn't come out for a couple of minutes. Evidently, he was getting the circulation back into our hero's legs. Next stop for the mealycock was the drinking fountain. Then, immediately, he flew up to his nest box to cover the hatching eggs that were his incentive to brave the flight. Father had kept his eggs warm under another pair and replaced them before the cock flew up to the box. The last thing to do was to place some special seeds in his nest box. Father returned to his seat and chattered with the men. They were debating whether he was early enough to do well. Father said, "Well, he's in the clock." 5 or 6 minutes later, the checker hen landed on board. She was paired to the mealycock. The eggs that he was diligently caring for, they had produced together. It was a near miracle, both home and in the clock within 9 minutes of each other. The incentive of the eggs, there was some speculation that they had covered virtually all the race distance together, before the strongest at that time flew on to cover the eggs. It was a beautiful day. The sun was well into the west and shining brightly. I was allowed to enter the loft to see the hero and the heroine, both sitting together on the nest containing their eggs. Father's take on the possible chance of doing well indicated that he believed by getting 2 out of 2 there would be quite a few others. One of the men had a car, so Father went with him to the clock station to register our bird's arrival. The clocks had to be checked within 2 hours of the bird's arrival, or they would be disqualified. It was several miles to the clock station. On arrival, they expected there would be a number of fanciers awaiting clock checking. The room was empty, other than the 2 clock officials. That was a surprising good sign. It had been slightly over an hour since our first arrival, so for anything to beat it, the competitors had less than 1 hour to arrive. No one had arrived within the cutoff point. Then 2 fellow fanciers arrived with their clocks. The officials opened their clocks and registered the bird's time of arrival. One came across and shook Father's hand. "Eric, that's a good un," indicating Father's bird's velocity would take some beating. In fact, that proved to be the case. He was second. As well, it dawned on me that I was responsible for training a championship winner. Father's winnings totaled more than 200 pounds, when you consider that the national average was less than 20 pounds per week. His winnings equated to 4,000 pounds plus in real terms. Not forgetting the award of a gold medal, which was inscribed with the winner's name, Eric Lodge and Son. Evidently, upon my birthday, he had included, presumably with pride, my name, but no evidence of that ever shone through. I received not one penny's reward from that 200 pounds. My father did know how to disappoint people. A few shillings would have made all the difference. The fact is, it wasn't until I was 11 years old before I shamed him into allowing me weekly spending money. Even then, it was a paltry and begrudged amount, and I often had to ask for it. I was treated as an unpaid slave, a gopher. However, the worm was turning, and by the age of 12, I was to become an unimaginably wild child. Back to the plot. I developed into a loner. My parents never spent any time with me, never showed any affection towards me, and little toward Joe. They never even spoke, unless it was to chastise or belittle, in the main responsible in my eyes for molding my personality at an early age. I never expected anything, and realized I would have to fight for anything I required throughout life. Normal parents would home educate and help, not at 252. Everything I achieved, for example. Learning to swim in the local river Dern, constructing a bike with parts recovered from the local rubbish tip, then learning to ride it was self-taught. The youth of Staincross and Napplewell in the 50s and 60s were extremely feudal. To the point of turf wars, who were these factions? The Monkey Parkers from Blacker Road at the extreme south of Mapplewell. The Spragg Valliers to the west, named Spragg because their homes were supported on the outside by huge timbers due to colliery subsidence. The Greensiders to the east, the New Streeters mostly central. The Longsiders, along with the Prinny Streeters, Princess Street, situated to the north. Then the Topsiders, true Staincrossers, from the rising ground above New Road. Unfortunately, the Topsiders had only one member, me. Fighting often broke out, individually and collectively, among these opposing factions. Ceasefires and peace never lasted long. Grievances were always settled violently. It was just the way it was a school of hard knocks. The first gang fights were hairy, but just cuts and bruises resulted. When that escalated into the use of rocks and bricks, it moved up to a far more dangerous level. This took place in two different ways on waste ground. One gang constructed a small fort out of milk crates, timbers, and corrugated sheets. 4 gang members would occupy it, then invite their enemies to demolish it. Using rocks and bricks from 20 meters, the resilience was timed by the referee. Eventually, when virtually all the structure was demolished, the occupiers would surrender, sometimes sustaining injury. Then the roles were reversed. Believe you me, it's a harrowing experience. Finally, the most dangerous conflict happened in straightforward head-to-head battles. This occurred on the same common ground, probably once a year. A 3-strand barbed wire fence separated both warring gangs. A coin was tossed to decide who had the slightly higher ground. Catapults, ball bearings, and throwing arrows were banned. Only rocks, bricks, and pebbles were allowed as ammunition. The aim was for one gang to charge the wire, obviously under fire from the other, and try to get among their opponents and physically subdue them. The gangs were 15 to 20 aside, but I've been involved when only 9 of us thwarted 20 or so for the allotted period of 15 minutes, during which time several full-on charges ensued. How no one was ever killed or blinded could only be put down to Providence. I started participating at 9 and finished when I left school at 15, just to prove that madness runs in the family. In 1956, father, who had prepared 3 long-distance pigeons to race in All England Grand National from Pau, on the borders of France and Spain, some 705 miles from Pau to Staincross. These birds were basketed for racing in Oxford. Fanciers from all over the country would send down their entries to Oxford by train. This year was a problem, however. There was a national rail strike. Unperturbed, father had a plan. He would borrow a fellow pigeon fancier's bike, with a carrying frame attached on the rear, secure his 3 entries in their basket, and then pedal cycle through the night to Oxford. After all, it's only 167 miles. He ventured upon his journey. At 6 p.m. on Tuesday evening, the weather was dry. Well, at least it was until he got to Derby. Approximately a third of the distance completed. The heavens opened. Father got drenched. Was he deterred? Not likely. Well, at least he wasn't thirsty. Any longer. Remarkably, he arrived at the marking station in Oxford a little before 4 p.m. on the Wednesday, 22 hours after his courageous but possibly foolhardy departure. You can imagine the amazement and the incredulity of the officials and the large number of Father's fellow members when he arrived absolutely shattered. Much handshaking and backslapping ensued. Probably some wag would have inquired if he was to compete in next year's Tour de France. Father was a marathon runner in his late 20s, early 30s. Father never showed any INTSD. That makes it even more inexplicable why he never even kicked a football with me. For that matter, never purchased one on my behalf. Well, not until professional clubs came calling as a 16-year-old, guilty conscience. No doubt, he forked out a £5 note, stressing I purchase a football. Everything sporting I'd ever achieved, to box, to ride a bike, to swim, to goalkeep, I'd to coach myself. That instilled into me the strength of independence and the will to make good without help. I sincerely believe that if you wanted to achieve anything bad enough, worked hard enough with dedication and determination, anything could be achieved. Even what appeared initially to be impossible. Back in Oxford, they conducted a cash collection for Father and secured a lift in a lorry back home, bike and basket on the back. Not surprisingly, it got a lot of press. One headline read, Eric's famous ride from York. A modern-day Dick Turpin. In the opposite direction, even more so a Dick Turpin when two of Father's race day entries took good money in the race. Back to school, we all sat the 11 plus in the final year at Mapplewell Juniors. What a pointless exercise that proved to be. I was in the B stream along with 34 more boys and girls. No one ever passed the 11 plus from the B class. The reason was simple. Our curriculum never touched upon the type of questions at the 11. Plus needed knowledge of when we opened our exam papers and were left absolutely clueless. It wasn't a level playing field. Something I'd realized and accepted was to be the norm for working class people. But that's life all day long. No good being frustrated and angry. Fuck them. You devise your own way forward. So, after we all departed first school, we were segregated, girls to Darton Girls' School, boys to Darton Hall Secondary Modern. 500 pupils. 4 forms A, B, C, D, 4 years. Unfortunately, the sport fields were not finished until my second year, so my personal ambition to play pro football had to be put on the back burner. That was big drawback. That allowed an ex-classmate of mine to move in. His father was extremely pushy. He'd been coaching his son for several years on our local playing field. He got his feet under the table. Immediately got noticed that year by Barnsley boys and never looked back. He played all that year's games for the school. With our new playing fields ready for the following season, I made a comeback and remained number 1 choice at intermediate, under 14, and under 15 level throughout my school life. I didn't get invited to the Barnsley boys. That shop was closed. My school number 2 played for England boys and signed professional. Forms at the age of 15, played 2 seasons with Manchester City in what is now the Premier League. It was always me under study when I was available. Eventually, professional clubs did contact me. I trialed twice at Sheffield Wednesday. In the same trials was one of the finest England goalkeepers of all time, Ray Clements. A year or so younger than myself and a better all-round keeper. Neither of us were offered contracts, so it was back down the pit for me. My schooling was unremarkable, although I did progress up into the A stream for the final 2 years. In my final year, I decided I wanted to be a trawler man. I haven't a clue why to this day. I composed a letter, sent it to the Grimsby trawler owner's ass, Fishdock Road, Grimsby. I received a polite reply with a color informative booklet stating that at present they were not hiring. So Plan B came into play, North Gobber Colliery. Discovering mother's infidelity would be about 8, I suppose, we kids were sent to. Bed never after 8:30 p.m. Father worked regular nights at the colliery, at the coal face. He always walked to work, leaving around 9:30 p.m. It was after 10 when I awoke, hearing strange, muffled noises. I crept downstairs. The room was in darkness, but I could see the outline of two figures. Walking towards them, my mother came forward. The man standing back I recognized. He was the plasterer who had recently conducted work on our house. I still recall seeing my mother's clothes in disarray. About 6 months later, my mother suggested we attend the local picture house in Applewell. Not for the matinee, but the late show at 8 p.m. I remember it was a war film. Above us, the waves. During the film, Mother disappeared for half an hour or so. A couple of weeks later, the same again. Another war film, Cockle Shell, Heroes. Mother wasn't away as long this time. The show finished around 10 p.m. Mother then wanted me to walk around the village with her. She was hanging about on School Street, the married plasterer's street. I refused to stay with her to give her credibility. I left her standing there and returned to 252. Father had been left for work 45 minutes previously, and my younger sister and brother were left in bed. Anything could have happened. The fire was still blazing. I hadn't a key, but the door was always left unlocked. There wasn't anything worth stealing anyway. Only God knows what time the errant wife, my mother, returned. I went straight to bed. This wasn't an isolated incident, although I never allowed myself to be used as a pawn. Again, I will relate another serious lapse into infidelity, which occurred when I was about 20. That's for later. I retained those secrets until I disclosed the events to the family some 60 years later. I wanted the delusionary family to know and accept the truth of what an appalling childhood we had to endure. Try as she would, she never got the better of me. Even during my infancy, I never gave her an inch. From me not leaving with her at 3 battles when she wanted me to tip up my wage at 15, I would pay board. She still got a good deal out of it, but she never controlled me. Employment PROSB CTS coming up to Easter 1961. When I was due to leave school, my future prospects hadn't and wouldn't be discussed. In our household, my parents had always been absolutely indifferent, for as long as I could recall. After the disappointment of my initial choice, going to sea on the deck of a deep water trawler had been thwarted, I'd already put that behind me. Incidentally, I was to fulfill that ambition successfully several years later. Choices now were severely restricted, limited to 3 not-so-attractive options. Down the mine, the local glass works, both these occupations figure on Barnsley's coat of arms. As an alternative to these 2 unattractive possibilities was one even less inviting: staying on at school. If I'd have stayed on and attended Barnsley Technical School, I would have been in the same financial situation as I was at present. Penniless, without dialogue with my totally disinterested and apathetic parents, who, if they had met me halfway, I would probably have taken the further education option, but really that was a non-starter. So choice was narrowed down to only 2 possibilities: the devil, the deep black pit. After mulling it over for a few days and being aware that at least 3 of my pals from our school football 11, and the fact that I trained with Ant, had played once already, underage at 14, with North Galbraith Colliery football team, I chose to apply for a job at the colliery. That decision made, I inquired of one of the new street gangs who worked there. How to proceed over the weekend, I never reviewed my choice. Don't say what if, just do it, and make it fit. Monday morning arrives as it would. I tidied myself, as best I could, and at 10 a.m. left the house, yes house, it was no home to me, and walked down the hillside. At this very moment, I'm sat upon the same park bench as I recall I was nearly 70 years ago, before I applied for a job at North Galbraith Colliery. My task today is rather different, of course. Why? Because then all my life was in front of me. Now, obviously, it's the absolute opposite. I've gone on to read my autobiography. All that remains is to decide where to commence and start with it. As I gaze down from my elevated vantage point onto the industrial estate, which has replaced the massive pit yard, I've drifted back in time. I see it as it was then in the long since past, not in the present. That gives me the answer to my book's opening chapter. That walk 66 years ago from this very spot, down through the enormous iron colliery gates, and commence a new life and discover all the contents of my book. Even today I recall it as yesterday. Bill O'Day was the manager's secretary, knocking. On his office door, a small balding man appeared. After a brief but cordial chat, he imparted the lowdown upon who to see and where to locate the person called Simeon Street, training officer. His office was adjacent to the fitting electric. Shops at the bottom of the pit yard. The weather hadn't been good. It was quite a muddy trek. It was March after all. I'd been advised by my new street source that Mr. Street would have spent the hours 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. down the pit, inspecting in his other role as safety officer, but would be normally through the showers at the pit head baths and in his office by 10:30 a.m. It was a little after that time when I approached his green door. I knocked a couple of times. There was no answer. So I elected to stand there and await his arrival, hopefully. Quite a few coveralls-clad employees were milling around. I remember feeling quite self-conscious, some of whom I knew. The looks they give conveyed in me a feeling, so the pits got you as well then. They trapped us too. Even in those early years, I knew that it was only a necessary stepping stone in my life, Hobson's choice at present, as they say. I never told anyone that, of course, their obvious response would have been, yes, they all say that. The walk. Down the yard, I'd passed the top of the shaft. They were winding coal, 4-ton tubes to draw. Much banging and clattering as the two men involved sent the tubs down to rail tracks to the washer and screens. Washing coal and screening it, that a bit of an anomaly. Its purpose to remove the rock from the coal, thus screening it off. This is achieved by submerging it in water. The heavier rock sinks to the bottom. The coal raises to the top and is selected separately. The rock then is transported to slag heaps that are like towering mountains adjacent to every colliery. The coal is transported to local power stations. Just a thought, I'm sure you all observed the mountains of rock. I've described remarkably 5 times more coal is extracted than rock on those tips. Looking upwards to the top of the yard, a figure appeared, small about father's age or older, wearing a suit rough weave tweed, hatless and oddly wearing pit boots. State of the pit. Yard, I suppose? No appointment was necessary, or references, so short of labor in the pits, breathing was the only requirement. The gentleman stopped, said good morning, and entered his office. Inviting me in, the furnishing had seen better days, long ago. Much like our house. Mr. Street, I ventured. Yes, son, what can I do for you? I'm looking for a job. I leave school in 2 weeks. Let's start with your name. I obliged, and your address. He didn't ask for my phone number. No one had them in the working class areas at this time. New Road, Terrace Lodge. Is your father Eric? Yes, Mr. Street. An old Staincross family. The lodges, and obviously local. That's a plus. What do you know about North Gobber? Well, I play football for them. You're not old enough. I trained with them as well. Malcolm Bell stings my hands every time he gets a chance. Yes, Malcolm. He works in the electric shop and underground. I think another requirement for selection is that you work at North Gobber. Is all I could say. Yes, so we will have to remedy that, won't we? You've got a job. And thank you, Mr. Street. Incidentally, I do know that Malcolm can hit a mean ball. You must be a goalie. I am not regular yet. Roy Holland is, but he's a lot older, and I'll catch up. Well, Terrence, let me tell you what I can offer you. All the lads start off in the timber yard, under the supervision of Walt Booth. There are 12 or 14 timber lands. Their task is filling tubs and trams with timber for the roof supports below ground, props, split bars, and chocks. After a month or so, we will review your appointment. If you prove adaptable, you may be offered more responsibility. When can you commence? To which I replied, I leave school on Friday the 26th of March. The following Monday, then. Even from the age of 5 or 6, father would take my sister on outings. I was never involved once they even went to the Grand National at Liverpool. I wasn't invited. If I'd let it get to me, I could have developed an inferiority complex. I suppose it did gender the me against the world state of mind. I nurtured the solo status within me. At about 10, Joe got a horse. They wouldn't allow me a dog. I'd asked often enough. A few years later, I put that unfair restriction to right. I would have done so sooner if I had had the money. Kim, the love of my young life cost me £1.50 old money from a pet shop in Wakefield. There's a tear in my eye as I write. £1.50 in 1961 would be equivalent to £40 today. As I matured into my teens, I often thought that my indifference to near hostile treatment may have stemmed from the possibility of my conception being the sole reason for their loveless union. In other words, a forced marriage. Father never got hostile, just awfully cold. Mother often did exhibit both these undesirable traits, both mentally and physically painful. An example of my fight not to be dominated by someone I didn't like or respect came as a 4-year-old. The four of us were seated at the table. Martin hadn't arrived at that point. It was tea time, 5 p.m.-ish. Bread and jam, sarnies and tea. Mother always had real butter. The rest of us had stork margarine. She decided to chastise me at the table. Stop drinking and eating. Obviously meaning at the same time, my response, why Father does. Father just looked across the table at her with the get out of that look on his face. That was the beginning of a conflict that was to literally last for her lifetime. The happiest time during that 60-year period was an occasion when we didn't speak for 2 years, although we had to be in contact every day of that time. The most hurtful aspect of my young life was having to come to terms with an existence without any affection, recognition, let alone love. It was indeed an extremely lonely time. At secondary school, I was very high in all the science subjects. Top in maths, whilst the English aspects of my schooling was abysmal. It's beyond me how I can relate in this fashion today. I've always loved music and sport. So, when the opportunity arose that our music teacher, Mr. Hoddle, convinced the headmaster, Mr. Richards, to invest in musical instruments, he was a violinist, so the school forked out and purchased half a dozen. I was 12 at this time and trying hard to be top of 2B, in which I succeeded. So I volunteered for one of the 6 instruments. Even though the wheels came off my school career, I continued to study the violin. After my mother's appalling response to the brilliant news that I was top in the class, as mentioned earlier in this narrative, I continued to study the violin until I left school at 15, by which time I could play reasonably well some easy orchestral pieces, such as Handel's Largo, etc. The violin is the most challenging of musical instruments, as are all the orchestra's string section. Why? With brass and woodwind instruments, you depress a valve and blow, you accomplish a fixed note or pitch. The same applies to the percussion section, hit or shake a percussion instrument, and you achieve a fixed sound. The only exceptions that come to mind is the brass section's trombone, which relies upon the player to locate the slide in the appropriate spot, or an undesirable note will occur. With stringed instruments, your note or pitch is totally reliant upon the exact location of the player's fingers exerting pressure upon the neck or fingerboard. Precision is paramount. Unlike the guitar, the violin does not have frets on the finger. Board to assist. Then, of course, there's the bow, without which there would be no sound. Bow work is equally as difficult as finger placement. The final element to master is pizzicato, plucking like a guitar. For anyone interested in experiencing how the greatest virtuoso of these 3 elements performed his unique magic, look up Niccolo Paganini's life story. Another anomaly I uncovered around that time is all exponents of stringed instruments. After play right-handed. Not many people know that. Juvenile DLNQ the period of my life. 13 to 15, I'm not particularly proud of, more ashamed than anything, I suppose. To say I became disruptive is akin to saying Vladimir Putin isn't such a bad chap. Well, here we have it. Between the age of 13 to 15, I became an uncontrollable monster. I formed a gang with 3 other members and an association with one other. With the latter, we stole cigarettes from the warehouse of a local shop, cartons of 200 packs at a time, only taking one of the many packs that were stored there to avoid detection and keep the scam going. It ran for almost a year. The shopkeeper never noticed the shortfall. One night, however, it was my turn to enter the warehouse, with my pal keeping watch on the road. to whistle if the shopkeeper left the shop, perhaps to go into the warehouse. Without a warning whistle, with me in the middle of the open yard, the light came on, followed by a cough. I knew that I could not escape detection, as the shopkeeper would emerge shortly out of the back door. I had a plan B. I was holding my reason for being in the yard in my hand. I rolled the tennis ball. On the floor, as he come out, he was shocked to see me. I calmly said, "Sorry, kicking the ball about it ran up your drive. If I'd been leaving with the..."